If you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do. All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Staci, and the other day I was flipping through a magazine. I don't even remember what magazine it was now. It was just sort of about I'm going to go with farm living. A lot of the ads seemed very much, aimed towards people who, if don't have a farm, have a homestead or would need a shed. There were a lot of ads for sheds. And I came across this ad for pheromones. And my first thought was, because animals, right? And there's something about, I don't hunt, but I think when you go out, if you don't use animal pheromones, you at least use animal urine in some cases to attract the animals to where you want them to be so you can hunt them or whatever. And I know there's something about using pheromones for certain insects so they can pollinate fruit trees and whatever. And so I was like, animals. And then very quickly discovered, wait, you're talking about attracting men or attracting women. What? I'm only vaguely remembering my high school biology, but I don't know that humans really do that so much. I know we supposedly have pheromones, but I don't know that you can bottle them, because wouldn't each human's pheromone smell differently? So this attracted my attention and I decided to look this up, and you can find a number of different pheromone perfumes, if you will. And some of them have different names, even if they're from the same company. Some companies will make more than one pheromone scent we'll go with. And I just happened to be looking on Amazon. And interestingly, even though in this ad it made it seem like women would want to use this pheromone to attract men, on Amazon, a lot of the pheromones were actually about men attracting women. And I was just like, that was not quite what a lot of them also came up with things about calming down your cats if you just type in the word pheromones into Amazon. So I was like, okay, that part I kind of understand, but a lot of guys really want a little help attracting women, almost more so it seems than women want help attracting men. Okay, interesting, but also does that work? Because again, wouldn't my pheromones be different from the next woman's, or I'm not sure. So that's what we're going to talk about today is pheromones. So for those of you who keep listening to me and are like, Fair what? What are you saying? A pheromone, Pheromones in the plural, pheromones. A pheromone is a secreted or excreted chemical factor that triggers a social response in members of the same species. So this is a bit it's similar to hormones. It's capable of acting like hormones outside the body to impact the behavior of the individuals that receive it. And they might not even necessarily, they do smell it. It's through the olfactory senses, but it might not have a scent per se. Even on Amazon, some of them were quote unquote unscented. Pheromones are sometimes classified as ectohormones and are based on the Greek word phero, which means to bear or carry, and hormone, which means impetus or stimulating. So to bear, impetus, carry, stimulation, something along that line, essentially creating an effect. So sex pheromones, which was what pretty much all the Amazon stuff that was not about cats were, sex pheromones are pheromones released by an organism to attract an individual of the opposite sex. So the odors released can be seen as a favorable trait selected by either the male or female leading. And this is actually well known in a number of species, not just like humans and insects and things you possibly want to hunt, but it's actually for a number of, I want to say large enough insects. So like in looking this up, I found that like amoebas probably do not have pheromones, but most other species do. Certainly a good number of vertebrates have some form of pheromones. It is likely that most externally fertilizing species actually coordinate their sexual behavior using pheromones. So this would be, things that attract a mate to then lay eggs, and that the use of pheromones can even, in some of them, affect their breeding capacity. That is not what I meant to say, but I do remember reading how in, I think it was an insect, the certain pheromone can affect the number of eggs the female lays. And I'm just like, I don't know. That would be very interesting in humans to be like, oh, depending on the type of pheromone, it determines whether a woman has one child or twins or triplets. Be like, that would probably strongly need to be like regulated medically or something. So in most species, pheromones are released by the non-limiting sex, but it's not quite clear. I was having a hard time figuring out what that means, non-limiting to the offspring or the sex that is not limited. I did also see a thing that said for most species, it's the female that releases pheromones, but it did seem more so that for a good number of things, the female was actually affected by pheromones as well. So it was just like, I'm hearing multiple things about these, and especially since I'm looking this up for humans, and as we'll talk about later, when it gets to humans, it gets even more complicated. Why must you confuse me, science, and or people who take science and then make it into perfume or whatever? I think even for the cats ones, there were like air fresheners, those little plug-in air freshener refills or whatever, and I was just like, I don't have a cat, darn it. But I actually really want to know how well that works. Like, obviously, presumably cat owners can tell of like, oh, my cat's really hyper and just can't settle down, and then I get this pheromone Glade plug-in sort of thing, and suddenly they're calm and they're pettable, and I'm like, okay, but do you smell something? Do you feel different? Would also be a better question of like, presumably this only works on cats, but could it also work on humans? So many questions about the cat pheromones. Just thank you, word searches on Amazon, for that coming up. So many questions. But so anyways, in most species, pheromones can indicate the availability of the female for breeding. And this has come up in a couple of things about like certain species that you would want to breed on purpose, people who do breed animals or farmers, that certain pheromones, you apply certain pheromones to stimulate breeding, let's just say. If you normally keep your male and female separate, but you notice that the female, or you've got this so down to a science that you can schedule it to the female being available to breed, you would then possibly apply pheromones to induce that reaction in the male. Likewise, male pheromones can sometimes have this effect on some females of certain species to not necessarily put them into ovulation, but to increase their readiness to breed, let's say. And male pheromones can also convey information about species and genotype. Not clear why exactly, if exactly, females don't do it. Again, I saw a number of different things that did not all agree on statements. Some said just pheromones in general convey information about species and genotype. Others said the male pheromones. So it's just like, so basically, I'm sending out invisible smell waves that tell a potential partner that I'm female and possibly ready to breed depending on where I am in my life. Thanks, biology. So anyways, we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned.
The average sedan is built with a steel frame and equipped with 6 airbags. Remember this the next time you see someone walking. Drivers, be aware. Pedestrians don't have armor. A message from the California Office of Traffic Safety. The average SUV has 2 blind spots, weighs between 4 and 6,000 pounds, and takes about 6 seconds to stop. Remember this the next time you're on foot. Pay attention, people. Pedestrians don't have armor. A message from the California Office of Traffic Safety.
Welcome back to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. Today we are talking about pheromones and if it is possible to, at minimum, have the pheromone perfume and just at maximum have pheromones in humans to then attract more of your desired mate. So the underlying theory, especially for pheromones in humans, is that you want to, and somehow your scent tells this to a potential mate, your sort of genetic compatibility. So with that, you want someone whose genes are similar, but not too similar, because then you start getting, inbreeding and all that, but you still want it to be somewhat similar because I think that increases the chance of like your offspring surviving. All our very basic primal biology instincts that we generally don't think about, but that still evidently do have an effect on our everyday lives. So in humans, pheromone usage has come up a couple of very interesting ways. So the first one is that there are things called pheromone parties. And just immediately when I heard that, I was like, what does that mean? I think I get why they went with pheromone parties because, alliteration, or it's not alliteration because that's not the same sound, but it is the same letter. So I'm still going to use alliteration. When you see it online, it's like, oh, the double P, and that does whatever alliteration does with your brain. Got it. But it's not, it's a mingle it's like a mingler / speed dating almost. So this has been a thing since at least 2010. The first one that we know of from the sort of quote unquote official Pheromones Party website, the first event was held in Brooklyn in 2010. At a pheromone party, the guests will have all slept in a t-shirt for 3 to 4 nights, which they then bring in a Ziploc bag to the party. Each bag is then assigned a number, and depending on which party you're at, you'll then have a way to sort of coordinate those numbers. Some parties do it where every party does it where you smell the bag, but then if you like the smell of someone else's worn shirt, you then either take a picture with the bag with the number, which then gets played on a slideshow at the party. Or I heard of one party that used pictures and Post-its. And so there was a Post-it by each picture where then you wrote the numbers you were interested in. Because the idea is you know what number you are, but nobody else does because you're supposed to be going first and foremost based off of smell to see if you like this person. And then you later be like, oh, I like this number. I did not hear of any, and I'm super surprised at this, any that was like the 2 numbers have to match before you're given each person's information. It was sort of just like, especially with the slideshow one, if you saw a picture with someone holding your bag and you found that person attractive, you could then go find them and talk to them. Or likewise with the Post-its one, since it's you marking which numbers you find attractive, people go around and check the Post-its to see if their numbers show up and then look at your picture to see if they like you and then go find you somewhere at the party. But I didn't see one where it was just like immediately you write down which numbers smell good to you and the other person does, and then some third party takes those numbers and see which one matches, if there are any matches, and then sends off the contact info to those various parties. Somehow that has not yet been a pheromone party, at least not one that I heard of. Not that I'm getting any ideas. I'm not about to put on a pheromone party. I think it might be interesting to go to one, but at the same time, the idea of smelling numerous, essentially sweaty t-shirts, and it's so interesting to hear the way people talk about this and like the way they describe it, because they don't all immediately like smell bad. Some and this is the idea of the party, some of them actually smell good to you. And then the way people are describing them are like fresh mown grass and like chocolate. And I'm like, I'm sorry, why are we wine tasting but with sweaty t-shirts? And maybe I just, because I don't drink wine, so I don't get that either. Like, why does wine taste like chocolate? I'm confused. But I'm just like, why are you specific notes of whatever in the t-shirt? Okay, that's a little over my head, but I do think it might be interesting to go to a pheromone party just to see how that all plays out. And I'd love to know like the statistics on how many relationships started because you matched pheromones or whatever. But so anyways, there are actually a number of other things that do this. Not too many. This is still sort of a startup situation, if you will. Like, again, the first pheromone party was in 2010, so it hasn't even been a decade, whereas, online dating has been around for how many years? Like, I'm now just thinking of the film You Got Mail, and so we're kind of not going to go there, even though I quite like that film. But there is also this thing called smell dating, which, despite its name, is not a pheromone party, even though that totally does sound like what a pheromone party would be, is actually smell dating. Oh, what? You've heard of speed dating? Let's do smell dating. Just up the ante there. That's exactly what a pheromone party sounds like to me, but that's not the case. So smell dating is actually a matchmaking service where instead of going to a party, you do still wear a t-shirt for a while, and it varies both between smell dating and the pheromone parties, but within pheromone parties, some of them, and the original one was just you wear the t-shirt for 3 nights while you're sleeping. For others, it's you wear the t-shirt day and night for 3 to 4 days to really, saturate it with your scent. But for smell dating, you then you send that t-shirt off to the company and they cut it into swatches and send it out to people who are subscribed to the service. And you yourself receive swatches from various people. So rather than going around and smelling numerous shirts, you have pieces of those shirts sent to you to smell in your own home as you wish. And then you, mark down which one you like. And if there is where if your numbers match, then your contact infos are exchanged and you can essentially go from there to back to regular online dating as that happens. But there's also a social networking site about smell, although this one does it a little differently, which I find quite interesting because rather than does this person smell good to me, and let me use my primal urges for that, there is a site called Smell Space, which I believe is based out of Israel, where it's about how you smell, and not just people, but the world. Because the idea is that each person has a sort of quote unquote olfactory fingerprint where in the way, I see the world differently from my sister, I also probably smell the world differently from my sister, though that's not something I think most people think of. I did see a comment while looking this up that in one of those things you clearly ask, like when you're just hanging out with friends, which sense would you get rid of first if you had to? Smell evidently goes first. So we clearly don't think that much about it. I don't notice how I smell the world. I could probably give a good number of adjectives of how I think about the world, how I see the world, do I see the world with the rose-colored lenses or etc.? We have a number of metaphors about that. And we even have some, about sound, like marches to the beat of their own drummer, but I can't think of any right now having to do with how I smell the world. I think there's something about being led around by your nose, but I've got nothing. But Smell Space, anyways, sends you a booklet with different, almost, they're not quite like scratch and sniffs, but they do sort of look a bit like them, or like those ads you sometimes see in magazines that are advertising, a perfume or a new scented body wash where you rub it and the heat from your hand or whatever makes the scent come off and then you can smell what it's like. It's a bit like that. And then you mark down, how you smell that. And then you can connect with people who smell the world in the same way you do. Again, that is such a strange concept to me. And it's a very new thing. It's only got, I think, maybe 2,000 or so users. And it's based in Israel. So most of them are actually Israeli. But I do think that would be very fascinating to be like, oh, you and I both smell the world. Like, I've still got optimistically. Can you smell the world optimistically? Like, this sounds really fascinating, and I'd love to know how much my smelling of the world determines my outlook on it. I can't even get away from looking there. But I don't, again, in the same way I don't do wine tasting, so I'm like, I can't smell certain notes of whatever. I don't generally think about smells in that sort of subtle of a sense, so I kind of really want to check it out, if only to be like, explain this to me. It's a little over my head, but I'm fascinated by it. So we're going to take another short break. Stay tuned.
The average sedan is built with a steel frame and equipped with 6 airbags. Remember this the next time you see someone walking. Drivers, be aware. Pedestrians don't have armor. A message from the California Office of Traffic Safety. The average SUV has 2 blind spots, weighs between 4,000 and 6,000 pounds, and takes about 6 seconds to stop. Remember this the next time you're on foot. Pay attention, people. Pedestrians don't have armor. A message from the California Office of Traffic Safety.
Welcome back to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, where today we are talking about pheromones, and we now finally come to the whole reason for this very interesting episode, which is that I saw an ad for pheromone perfume, and I'm questioning whether or not that's a thing. So there has been research on this in humans, not nearly as much as with animals, and that's for a number of reasons. There is this thing called the McClintock effect, which was somewhat proven and then somewhat later disproven, but I have heard of before, even before hearing of the scientific name, so I think it might actually be the case. The McClintock effect is the synchronization of menstrual cycles among women based on unconscious odor cues. So I did hear of this where, you know, a group of women who are all in, like, say the same sorority house or whatever, will eventually, all their cycles will sort of sync up together because they're having this unconscious scent of, I guess, again, pheromones, being able to smell of, oh yes, that woman's at such and such a part of her cycle. Okay, let me, you know, sort of get there too. It's not clear why exactly that your body is like, I need to be where that woman's at, but that I have heard of stories like that. But there is some evidence of pheromones having an effect on humans, and then there isn't exactly. There has never been a actual peer-reviewed study that has demonstrated a direct influence from pheromones. It's thought that even though humans are usually more highly dependent upon visual cues, when in close proximity, smell can also play a role in socio-sexual behaviors. And researchers do agree that we are hardwired to be drawn to people whose scent we like, but it's not been conclusively shown that that means humans have functional pheromones. And there's an inherent difficulty in studying humans, and this is why, you know, as controversial as it is, there's still animal testing for a good number of things, because there's a whole lot of moral and ethical questions that come in when you start wanting to experiment on humans. With animal studies, you can control for things like diet and their genes and their upbringing and diseases that might affect things like body odor. But you can't really do that with humans because all medical ethical codes. But also, even if you somehow could, the problem with studying human pheromones is that we as humans generally have a sort of standard, and this can vary from culture to culture, but we sort of have a standard about cleanliness and body odor, which will then obviously throw off any sort of study trying to see how pheromones affect you, which is why for all the pheromone parties, it's, you know, you sleep and or live in this shirt for 3 to 4 days certainly without washing the shirt, but also possibly without washing your own self, because that's the only way for the pheromones to really get into it. If you're constantly, you know, using a scented soap or whatever, that's going to mess it up. But we as humans are like, but I need to go shower. I need to go, put on deodorant, all of that. So it's just like, yeah, so that study can't do that. Also, for women who use hormonal birth control, that can actually affect both their own scent, but also their ability to sniff out a partner. So that's why previous studies have been like, yeah, we can't really come to anything conclusive. So there are pheromone perfumes. There are. And you can find them in a number of places. They all seem to have something to do with oil, and I'm not sure if that's a carrier base or whatever. There is some that claim to, change. The scent of it supposedly changes based on who it is. So if one person puts it on, they might smell a bit citrusy. But if another person puts it on, they might smell a bit earthy or musky. Those claims are, again, mostly anecdotal. There's no science to really back that up. But I wasn't able to find too much on where the pheromones in these things are drawn from. There are a number of human sex pheromone chemicals that are believed to exist. And as they all had really long scientific names and really long scientific explanations of what they were and how they worked, I refrained from putting them in this episode. But if you type in like human sex pheromones and go to the first thing that's not actually trying to sell you something, you can probably find it. Some of the pheromones for sale will list, this one has, I'm just going to go with the A one, and this one has the E one, and this one has the C one. Again, those are really long scientific names that I just won't even try and pronounce. Others don't say that at all. They simply say this pheromone attracts men, or for men, this pheromone attracts women. Or I did actually see one that was for gay men to attract men. And I'm not even sure how that exactly works, since the general belief for sex pheromones is that it's there to attract a compatible mate. So you're thinking solely of like sexual breeding. I don't know how a pheromone would work and or adjust to attract a person of the same sex. Would it simply be you use the pheromone from the opposite? So if you were a guy trying to attract guys, you would use the woman's pheromone. And if you were a girl trying to attract girls, you'd use the men's pheromones, since those are meant to attract that opposite sex. Not clear, but there was at least one that was specifically aimed at gay men, for men to attract men. And I was like, well, okay then. There are a number of ways that they do this. Again, there's several oils. There are several perfumes that then also have a scent on top of them, though I'm a little confused on that wouldn't, affect the effects of the pheromone. Wouldn't that possibly throw it off a bit? But a number of the unscented ones did have complaints about, this actually does have a scent and it smells, and it doesn't necessarily smell great. So that might be more of a cover up for the scent of the pheromone itself than for that scent's effect on someone near you. There were oils and candles, which again, I'm not sure how that works, although I do believe that's how insect pheromones work, is it is some sort of thing that drifts on the wind and then that attracts the insect to that location. There was body lotions and deodorants, which of all of them, I'm like, that one actually kind of sounds the most, because the whole point of a deodorant is, so you don't smell where you're sweating a lot. So if you are putting on a pheromone, that one should be like super amped up solely from your own sweat. And then there were also soaps, which on the one hand I get and would almost be more willing to try that than anything else, because at least you're kind of washing it off. But then on the other hand, you're kind of washing it off. So wouldn't I be washing off a good portion of the effect? Would this really have an effect since I just rinsed after using the soap? So again, not clear. All of the proof or disproof for that is anecdotal. There hasn't been any conclusive scientific study about pheromones in humans, even though it is believed we probably do at least put out some sort of scent thing, and that there are pheromones in a good number of species elsewhere. So, interesting episode we had today. Not sure I want to try them. Very interested again in sort of seeing the data for things like the smell pheromone parties and the smell dating services and what have you. Not sure if I want to necessarily do pheromones when I don't know where you source those pheromones from, which would involve more scientific thinking that I definitely do not want to do at this moment. I just kind of want to go into fall and take a break. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.